Olá para você que acompanha o canal do Conselho Federal de Medicina. Hoje temos uma conversa especial com o Dr. Otmar Kloiber, que é secretário-geral da Associação Médica Mundial. Hi, doctor. Thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And at first, I would like to ask you, what do you believe are the key elements and the biggest challenges for achieving high-quality healthcare globally?
That's actually a difficult question because the situation in the countries are very, very different. And you know, there are countries which have a very highly sophisticated healthcare system. Some of those are very high performant, but not necessarily available to all. And you have healthcare systems which are more equitable. But you have also a large part in the world where people don't have access to a universal health coverage or even to health coverage at all. So the questions on what to do are very different from country to country. But in general, I would say that we all nations have to try and to focus more to provide universal health coverage to people. This is for the healthcare system as such the most important imperative right now.
And what have we learned about this global crisis? We also have climate change and many things. And the WMA, how to regulate the way to deal with this crisis?
Now, first of all, I think it's important that we all understand that in those crises, we always have very strong health components. For a pandemic, that is very evident in the beginning because it's a health problem. But for instance, with global warming and the climate crisis, it was for many people not clear that this has a very strong health impact. And yet what we have found and what we have said now already 20 years ago is there is virtually no climate change that does not also have a health impact, either direct or indirect. And that is something what we want to try to bring to politicians, that they put a stronger focus on prevention and mitigation of those processes, of those emergencies or dangers, in order to avoid as good as possible the health consequences of that. For pandemic, for instance, this means better preparation. Better preparation in the healthcare system itself, better stockpiling of materials for personal protection, better stockpiling of vaccines, better preparation of vaccine production. And it also means, and that is equally important, that the state itself prepares legally for what to do during a pandemic, and not staying there in the moment of the pandemic and not knowing what to do, which we have seen in most countries, that they were absolutely left alone and didn't know what they should do. And then they have tried to muddle through this situation, which certainly was not helpful.
And what are the biggest challenges to regulate artificial intelligence in the medical practice?
Well, to be faithful is that we still don't know what it in the end means. It is so new for us that we are just finding out what we can do with it. We're using it already. We're using it as well in administration. We're using it in clinical practice to a limited extent. And we are trying now to understand what are the dangers of using the artificial intelligence and at the same time balancing it against the benefits which we can achieve. To do better diagnosis, to do better therapeutic approaches, to have a better regimen of the management of resources for all people, where we believe that artificial intelligence certainly can and will help us. But on the other hand, we have to understand what are the pitfalls, where are the dangers, where are the limitations of the artificial intelligence systems, where they may lead us into a wrong direction because the information that has been used in order for the learning of the system was not correct or was biased. And those are the things which we are just now trying to find out, trying to understand. And whatever we now develop in regulation, I'm pretty sure in a couple of years it will be obsolete and we have to redo, because this is really something which we are learning. And that is not true for medicine alone, that is probably true for any other sector in society.
And that's why it's so important to have this discussion in conferences like this one.
Absolutely, and I think we have seen here very good examples on critical discussions about the potential but also the dangers of AI use. And I think it is something that we really have to understand. But to put it in a positive note, every technology which we have had this problem. You know, it was the introduction of the telephone which had the same question: what can we do with a telephone? You know, when a patient calls and says, I have this and that, what is the reaction which we do? How do we use it? How do we use it for better emergency services and so on? And we have learned for that. The difference is, with the introduction of the telephone, we had 50 years time. Now for AI, we don't have 5 years time in order to learn how it works, and we have to be much faster.
And what about the part of regulation of polemic points like euthanasia and assisted suicide? How is that in the WMA?
It's like in society at large. We have certainly very different opinions when it comes to question of beginning and end of life. Because then we come immediately to very deep moral questions or even moral dilemmas which divide the groups. And this is not along political lines, it's not about cultural lines. We have these divides in all cultures, in all countries, maybe to a little bit different extent, but what we find is that we have these questions, for instance, about euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide basically in all societies. And certainly these are questions which doctors alone cannot answer for the society. The societies have to answer those questions. We can certainly discuss what is our role in this, and that is difficult enough.
Yeah, when you think about the aging of population, what do you think medicine can offer to this group?
I think what we are understanding more and more is that the purpose of medicine should not be only to extend life, but to give more life to the years, and not only years to life. That means that we are very much interested on what we can learn in order to keep people active for a longer time. And this is something which to a large extent is happening because we have been learning that you can be fit for an older age than what we have seen 20, 30 years, 40 years ago. So that we have actually an extension of the active life and livelihood of people in there. And I think that is going on very well. I'm not one of those priests who thinks we can live forever. That certainly doesn't happen, and I'm not sure whether it's a good model for this world. But certainly what we see and what we are aiming for is to adding these life to years and not only years to life.
CFM is the largest institution in the number of physicians. How can it contribute to the medical practice globally?
I think it already does. The CFM has been cooperating with us, with the World Medical Association, for many, many years, at least as long as I know. And what we expect from a large community like the Brazilian physicians is that they bring their ideas and their moral ideas and ethical ideas about healthcare to the international community and contribute and also challenge and being challenged. You know, we always have to ask ourselves, is that correct what we do at home? And we can only find out if we discuss with others. If we ask others. And sometimes we have findings where we see that there is a development and people change in mind or have new insights, and then it's important to bring them home. But that is not only true for the regulation of medicine, that is true for medicine in general, and that is why we think exchange in medicine is so important. And while it is important for surgeons, for doctors of internal medicine, to exchange and to have international exchange and to have learning internationally, to bring in people from other countries, to go to other countries. And the same thing is true for the regulation of medicine. You cannot do it just at home. You have to reach out, you have to discuss, you have to be present at the international discussion, and you sometimes have to also feed back into your own home country and say, folks, there is something going on, a development, and we have to discuss this here at home as well.
So your work at the WMA has a lot to do with discussing with the different populations, different governments, to achieve the best practice worldwide.
That's absolutely correct. That's what we try. We try to improve the situation under how and under conditions under which doctors work globally, so that they have really an ideal environment to serve their patients and their populations best. That is the idea that is behind it. And of course, yes, that is sometimes very difficult from country to country and from legislation to legislation. Some are more open, some are more progressive, but that alone is not a guarantee that everybody gets healthcare. You know, you have very well-developed healthcare systems which are very capable of doing things, but they don't provide them for all. And of course, our interest is that you have some equity in that. So you always have also to look for the social determinants of health, that they are correct and that they are being thought of. And that is something which, of course, we as physicians cannot do alone, but we can constantly ask the politicians that they have an obligation to look for that.
And that's why bioethics, it's completely together with the association and this work to englobe all the nations.
Yes, and especially for an organization like the Federal Council of Medicine, it is important to be part of this discussion, because the Federal Council has a role in supervision and has a role in setting the rules nationally, and therefore its context or its connection with the international development is crucial and is of utmost importance.
Do you think globally the physicians are aware of how bioethics can help in the daily practice?
There is, I think, what I would call a natural compass in all of us. Mm-hmm. And when you do things which bring you to limits, limits because of beginning or end of life questions, severe illness, I think most of us automatically reflect much more. Mm-hmm. And most of us come to conclusions which are very close to what we have written as rules themselves. So you don't have to tell them in the first place to behave decent and moral. What I think is that the rule setting which we do is really to set guardrails for the very complex situations or for those who don't want to reflect. For most of the physicians, I think their inherent compass is already working quite well. And then there are some which have to be reminded.
We were talking about the IA, the technologies, and how to deal with confidentiality in the age of social media.
That's good. This again is a very important question, because it extends far beyond medicine, and it comes to the question on how individuals themselves decide about this. And I must confess, very often when we open apps, when we open web pages, they are consent forms which are 30 pages long and everybody clicks yes. Because you don't want to deal with it, because you don't understand the mumbo jumbo which is in there. And I think, again, here it is a social question and a political question to deal with those problems and to find new strategies on how to properly inform and properly protect people. And that is true especially when it comes for the sharing of health data. And most people think, when I get something back from it, from an app for instance, you know, a fitness tracker or something like that, which gives me, then I'm willing also to share. And that in the first place is not wrong. But I think we all have to understand, and it has to be transparent, what is being done with the data, who has access, who can exploit it, and where can I say, stop, wait a minute, I don't want this. And those are things which we have not yet completely understood, and have certainly not yet completely regulated. And that is something which unfortunately takes a little bit longer, because in politics very often there are people who are of a higher age and not as used to or as not much using these new tools as younger generations do. So there is this gap which has to be filled, but I think that is something which we're also learning, that we have to come closer to the real problems which are existing in this world right now, and then they have to be regulated. But it's not to blame anybody. It is a complex process, and it requires a lot of regulation and certainly also a lot of education in order to develop discern strategies for people.
And another point is mental health, caused with social media, this use of technologies. And what are the biggest points in the mental health you think we should focus on?
Well, there are two different aspects. Number one is, what are the mental health effects of our change in social life by use of social media? So do we see there a stronger isolation of individuals, that they get more lonely in a pretended world of friends by clicks? And that is certainly something which we also now only try to understand. What does it do to our psyche if we are having virtual friends instead of having real friends, instead of having real interaction, having virtual interactions there? And that is something which just unfolds, that we are slowly trying to understand what does it mean for us and what does it mean to our mental health. On the other hand, we see that these tools can be helpful in treating mental health problems. So there are good examples where you can show that, for instance, lowering the threshold in order to get help is possible by using help online, where people can anonymously seek help in the first step, and then you can tell them, you know, we really have to sit together and talk directly. And that is something where I think there are chances with these social media, but there are also dangers which we are just now trying to understand and trying to learn. And I, at the moment, cannot say what has the higher weight, the problems or the solutions which we get. But we certainly have to find out what we can do against the problems and how can we use the solutions.
When we think about the next years, what are your personal visions and expectations to advance in the medical world?
Well, right now, unfortunately, I must say one of the biggest problem is the crisis which we have in the world and the wars which we have in the world, because they cost a hell lot of lives. They produce big problems for feeding people in other parts of the world. If you think about the food production in Ukraine and the need for food in Africa, those tensions and those problems currently are the biggest problem. On a little bit longer range, it is certainly the climate crisis, which puts us under huge distress and big problems which we have to deal with. And both would require that we have a better international political cooperation, what we currently don't have. But if we want to master those crises, then certainly that will be necessary. So it's not that much something that physicians can do, it's something that really politicians have to do in order to avoid the big and severe health problems which we get from those crises.
Okay, Dr. Otmar, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing with us some of your thoughts and your work. And it was a big pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. A gente fica por aqui e até a próxima entrevista. Tchau, tchau.
Conselho Federal de Medicina. Defendendo princípios, aperfeiçoando práticas.